All right, hello. Here we go. We're back. It's January, and we're going to finish up our South Africa Apartheid unit, our review for our Unit 3 test. And of course, there are prior videos on South Africa and Apartheid that also are fair game for questions, so be assured that you watch those if you haven't had a chance to already. In fact, if you haven't watched those, I would stop this one, go back to the playlist, and watch that one first. Okay, cool. But if you did watch the previous ones and you remember what we did in the first semester, you do hopefully remember that we were really getting at the way that a system like apartheid could even develop over time, right? This is not a simple process. How did a minority population seize control over the majority population? And more precisely, what we're getting at is how did a white minority gain political power in a country that's population was majority black, right? And so it's important, of course, for us to go back to what we remember before 1948, that the apartheid like system was already in place. It wasn't officially apartheid, rather, until after the National Party gained the majority of the seats in parliament after the 1948 election. So sometimes I refer to the period in South Africa prior to 1948 as pre apartheid. You could talk about it as the road to apartheid, what have you. But still, we know that many of these de jure segregation examples existed prior to 1948. All we really saw was that they became more extreme after the National Party, which, of course, hopefully you remember, was largely the Afrikaner white population, uh, gained the majority of seats in parliament. Right? So at this point, you've probably read most of the content of these slides. I know that this is more text than usual, but this is really just stuff that we learned in the previous video, so I think we can just keep going, right? And this is where we're going. So instead of just pausing on this slide and taking too long, let's just get to it, shall we? Right? So let's first talk about the Black consciousness movement. Actually, I lied. Before that, let's talk about ways in which in the 60s, after Sharpeville and after Nelson Mandela's imprisonment, the apartheid movement first was driven, rather, the anti-apartheid movement was driven underground, and how the apartheid government in South Africa started to really double down on any resistance effort to apartheid, right? So, starting in the mid 1960s, you see again that, just like we saw with the Suppression of Communism Act, right? The South African government is essentially going to make it virtually impossible for any dissent group to even exist, right? What the Terrorism Act did, very similar to the Suppression of Communism Act, it essentially said that any group that was seen as a political dissident could go to prison and potentially face the death penalty, right? So consider what this might do to people who support the ideas of the ANC or the PAC, but yet don't want to die doing it, right? This is, again, one of the major reasons why the anti-apartheid movement got driven underground, right? Further, the Internal Security Amendment Act was very similar to the General Law Amendment Act. And if you remember that, that made it legal for the South African government to imprison anyone for up to 90 days without any cause. So no warrant, probable cause, anything like that. The Internal Security Amendment Act was similar to that, but this time the government could detain anyone, so put anyone in prison for up to a year with no cause, and that was renewable. So let's say the year was up, that person could just remain in prison. No trial, no attorney, nothing. And then another thing, which arguably cast a much wider net, was that the South African government itself was responsible for distributing tons of pro-apartheid, anti-black propaganda. And this is what this is, right? This is a poster that was created by the South African government, essentially demonizing Nelson Mandela. This is before he was convicted, right? And it's attempting to say that he was a terrorist. And we already know how that connects to the Terrorism Act, right? It's also trying to perpetuate any person in the ANC as a terrorist. So consider how this is going to spread false information among the white population in South Africa. I also think it's interesting that this poster is written in English. That suggests that the audience could also be the British white South African population. I shouldn't say British, rather, I should say the English white population. They just originally were British, if that makes any sense. Cool. So let's talk about the Black consciousness movement a little bit, right? So if you read that text in class, feel free to read it again on the previous slide, right? You are aware, right, a little bit more about who Steve Biko was and what he was attempting to do for the anti-apartheid movement. We made a lot of connections in class to the Black Panther Party. It in many ways is quite similar to the Black consciousness movement in the sense that, and also the Black Power movement in the United States, in the sense that this is more of a Black-centered movement, right? That the ANC and the PAC were, at this point, basically, at least within South Africa's borders, unable to function, right? And even though they did function outside of the country, most of their leadership, at least the top tier leaders of these movements, were white. So Steve Biko, who was a Bantu-born Black South African, right, went to the segregated schools as a result of the Bantu Education Act. He was really frustrated with this, right? He felt, why should a movement that's meant to give justice to the Black population be led by white people? So what he ends up doing, right, with an organization, a student-led organization that he formed called the South African Students Organization, or the SASO. It reminds me in some ways of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee during the American Civil Rights Movement, right? Basically, they band together, and the movement itself is not the organization. The movement is much bigger. And what the movement is really trying to do is to just reinstill a sense of pride among the Black population, right? That at this point, apartheid had existed long enough that the younger generations had never known anything different. They also went to a school, most likely, that was not taught in their native language, right? And so if you're literally taught by the language of your oppressor, then you were taught that you were inferior, if that makes any sense. So what this is really trying to do, and that's the reason why they use the word consciousness, is they're attempting to get the Black population to reawaken, right? And take pride in themselves. And then ultimately that will turn into more of a campaign for justice, if this makes sense. Okay, how are we doing on time here? I don't know. Let's just finish up the slides that we had from that day and then move forward. So the Bantu Homelands Constitution Act is also very, very important here, and it is very similar to the Bantu Self-Government Act that we talked about before the semester break. And essentially what this does is this made it so that the South African government had the authority to, quote, grant, end quote, independence to any of the Bantustans. And I air quoted, virtually, the word grant because this is sort of a euphemism, right? That this was not seen in a positive way by the people that lived in the Bantustans. Giving independence to these places essentially meant that they were literally dumping the dumping grounds, if that makes sense. If these homelands were now seen by the South African government as completely different countries, the South African government had no obligation to take care of them in any way. It was already that bad in a lot of ways anyway, but it got that much worse because the South African government essentially said, no, you're free, you're emancipated. You have no resources, you have no money. Furthermore, we're also going to prevent you from having any sort of military. Furthermore, you're surrounded you're surrounded by other countries that are unable or unwilling to ally with you out of fear of retaliation, right? So this is not very great for the Black population, right? And furthermore, it's important for us to realize that the only country that recognized these so-called independent Bantustans, the only country rather that recognized them was South Africa itself. So the UN at this point was raising an eyebrow about South Africa's true intentions. And let's finish with Soweto, and then we'll do another video later. Okay, so we in a lot of ways could make some comparisons between Soweto and Sharpeville, right? So the most obvious comparison that I want to make right now is size. So Soweto was much larger. Another thing that's very much larger, I mean, specifically with regard to the number of people involved and also the number of people killed. And we'll get back to that. The other thing that I think is really important to note is that the Soweto uprising was led by children, school students. This doesn't mean that it was exclusively run by school students. In fact, it's spread outward over time. So let's talk about that. So this is not a key term here, but it is interesting. In 1974, the Afrikaans Medium Decree now made it mandatory for all Bantu schools to be taught in Afrikaans. During the Bantu Education Act, this had started to happen organically, but there was no mandate for schools to actually teach in that language. After it was mandated, students were very upset. Like we said before, they saw through it. They realized that their oppressors were attempting to keep them down by teaching them in their own language. So they decided to stand up to it, and they staged a peaceful protest in Soweto, which you can see here. Oh, my pointer isn't working. Oh, there we go. So it is. It's not too far outside of Pretoria and Johannesburg, and it was a place of major social and political unrest at this period. So all these children go outside of their class, they try to sing the national anthem, and all their plan was after that was to go to class. But the police end up ultimately the big thing that happens is as the protesters are outside, right? The South African police fires upon some of them, right? One individual, this 12-year-old boy named Hector Peterson, was killed in the gunfire. This is his sister in dismay, and this is a young man carrying his lifeless body. This picture circulated around the world. So really, Soweto, the impact of it went far beyond the actual protest of the day. The violence was much more prominent after the uprising, right? Just like when Martin Luther King was killed in 1968, there were race riots that broke out all over the country. So the uprising itself was a reaction to this tiny peaceful protest in Soweto. And the product of that uprising was that 176 people, at least according to the South African government, you can't see my face, but I have my sarcastic Miss Sutton face. That is the official death toll according to the South African government. There are many on the other side, on the anti-apartheid side, that say that number was much higher and ultimately it was a cover-up, right? But we don't know for sure. Cool. So we're going to stop here. I don't have time, I don't think, to make another video now, but I'll make sure that over the weekend you will have more to work with. So thanks so much for watching. Stay tuned and thanks.